Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another little episode of the 2024 astrology panel. I am absolutely ecstatic to have this beautiful Antoinette back as a guest because last year her Jupiter in Taurus overview was quite luscious. It was luxurious. It hit all of the Taurian notes that I'm all about with the pleasure and the desire and the marination. So I loved that. So I'm excited to hear about Jupiter in Gemini, which is very different to Jupiter in Taurus.
Yeah, it's lovely to be here. So thank you for having me on. It's really gorgeous.
Thank you so much. I'm glad it seems that astrologers are picking their themes. You had Jupiter in Taurus last year, and now you're Jupiter in Gemini. So I really love this. A couple of the other astrologers, Lilith or Saturn, they have their little statement. And I really like that because it just gives us that sort of consistency each year as well, which is great. I'm super excited to go into this, but as usual, before we dive into the astrology of Jupiter and Gemini, which, trust me, you're all going to really need to get like pen and paper out, get some notepads, because this is a very, very mental overload transit. But I will ask you the question I've been asking all of my astrologer guests, and that is to chat about an aspect that has happened for you in 2023, such a huge cataclysmic year of change, but how knowing the astrology has really helped you to navigate that transit. I want to hear all the things.
Yeah, there's been a few. I mean, I've had Saturn square Saturn. I've had when Pluto went into Aquarius, I had it squaring my Mercury. There's been quite a lot of and more. There's just so much more.
It's pick one from the hat. But how can you? I know sometimes it's like we're going through literally like 6 at the moment, so I can't even tell which one's friggin' doing me over.
Look, it's actually been since the nodes shifted, it's been night and day because I have a Libra stellium. I've had the South Node move into my Libra kind of area, which is a 10th house area. So it's been very powerful. I had an eclipse right around my solar return, so very close to my sun. And I have felt that sort of receding away, wanting to retreat, go quiet, really kind of pull in that energy and draw that solar power into a more sort of private sort of sphere and kind of not be as visible necessarily, but still doing my work. So, and also wanting to sort of change direction and share more in other ways. So it's been, I mean, I went off social media around that time because it just was cutting back or reducing my sort of visibility in some areas in order to focus energy in other ways. And it's actually been really, some people dread eclipses, but it doesn't always have to be, something negative. It can actually be quite profoundly helpful. And it's not the kind of, magic you want to sort of kick off and work with or anything in any conscious kind of ritualistic way. But it was just more like an allowing this to come through because it's like, oh yeah, it's time. And it's been good.
I really love this point that you've made. Firstly, I agree. I mean, I love eclipse seasons and they're all very different depending on how they aspect our chart. And I'm very similar to you. I have a Libra stellium with my rising in Libra as well, all outer planets, but still. And I've loved this eclipse season. I mean, October, to me personally, has probably been one of my favorite months of 2023.
Yeah.
It's been amazing. But what I've loved that you've really given a really great insight to, if people haven't picked up on it, is that what Antoinette said is her birthday was very close to a solar eclipse. And what a solar eclipse is like there's hidden, things are obscured, it's dark. And to have a solar eclipse near your sun, even if it's just a few degrees away, whether before or after, that's really going to affect you, your sun, your purpose, who you are. And exactly what you said, like it's like, I want to go into the background now. I want to retreat a little bit. I'm still doing my work, but from a very different sanctuary, because the solar eclipse has actually obscured something. And once you come out of this, it will be quite probably amazing revelations. I mean, you're going to start working with that theme of Monday when you come out of it, so that'll be exciting. We're little theme of Monday twins. We've got our theme of Monday from Fear and Sundry, which I've been wearing it every single day. It's fucking magic.
They're brilliant.
They are. And so I love that point, because we all know that if an eclipse either hits very close to our sun or moon, that's quite big. I mean, if it hits any planet, of course, that's pretty intense, but the sun or the moon, because they're the luminaries, that's what rules an eclipse, is the sun and moon. So really fascinating. I just loved the way you said that. I was like, yes, I hadn't thought about it like that. And that I just wanted to, again, reiterate that and maybe share that context around how you've spoken into stepping back, all based on that solar eclipse, which is dark. It's the dark moon eclipse. So you've really, you know, exactly done exactly what that is. And I really love that for you. And it's really going to set up quite a powerful year for you as well.
Yeah, Venus perfection year, 5th house perfection year. So I'm, you know, quite happy about that.
Oh,
but
hello,
yeah.
hello, sexy lover.
But you know, it's kind of this whole idea. You know, I've got a day chart, so without going into my astrology too much, the sun is the luminary of my sect, and so it's quite a big quite a big thing.
Yeah.
But yeah.
That
So yeah, don't dread eclipses.
Response. Yeah, I really love that, because you could have talked about the Saturn square and all the things, and we've had a lot of sort of Saturn chat and stuff, as you can imagine. For Pisces risings or Pisces, you know, we've got a couple of astrologers with Pisces risings, Pisces suns. So that was just a brilliant answer, and really triggered something for me too around what would happen when you have your birthday around that, and that if stepping back out of the light per se feels like you're going against what you want, it's actually probably exactly what you're meant to be doing, because it was a solar eclipse. A lunar eclipse on your sun would probably feel extremely different.
Very much.
Everything's illuminated. So I love that. I think that was a really great thing for all of us to remember. And like I said, I hadn't heard it in that sort of context. So even, you know, I love learning. I just love continuing to learn. So thank you.
That's lovely. Yeah, no, it's a new beginning.
It's a great answer. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
So let's, you know, get our pens and paper
ready,
because this is Gemini we're talking about here, Mercury. But Antoinette's going to take us on her journey, and get us into this Gemini in Jupiter and Gemini transit, which starts 26th of May next year. So I'm going to mute myself, drink my cup of tea, take my notes, and chime in every now and again.
Oh, that'd be great. Yep. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, well, the thing is that before we get to Jupiter and Gemini, we've still got Jupiter and Taurus for the first nearly half of the year, because it changes signs in April 2024. And Jupiter in Taurus in 2023 is been so different to what it's going to be in 2024, even before it gets to Gemini. And how it's going to behave in Gemini, what it looks like in Gemini is going to be shaped by those sort of very final weeks and couple of months in Taurus. Because essentially this year in Taurus, Jupiter has been kind of holding the fort for Venus while she's been doing her thing, you know, and retrograde, moving through Leo and retrograding through Leo, you know, for the best part of 4 months. It's just been a very fixed agenda, you know, and Taurus has been sort of, you know, plowing the fields for her and taking care of things as best Jupiter can. While, you know, there's also been eclipses across the Venus, you know, the Taurus Scorpio axis. So it's been quite a seriously sort of steady-ish sort of time for Jupiter to do certain things almost in the background. We haven't really sort of seen Jupiter. People haven't been talking much about Jupiter this year. But of course, as Jupiter's going to start moving towards the end of the stay in Taurus, that's when we're going to get into those possibly quite tricky late degrees of Taurus that can be very very exciting in some ways, because it's going to meet with Uranus there. And that's something that we didn't talk about so much because it's happening in 2024. And that's going to be a moment, because there's also a fixed star there, which I'll also talk about. But I suppose we should really kind of mention what the nature of Jupiter is, because a lot of people will know, but for those who, you know, even those of us who do, it's nice to be sort of reminded of what Jupiter wants to do and the nature of it. Because when it does move into Gemini, it will be what we call in its exile, because it will be far from its home in, say, Sagittarius or Pisces, which are the traditional domains of Jupiter. And also the exaltation of Jupiter is Cancer. And that's really important too when we think about what it's going to be doing in Gemini, because towards the end of Gemini, we're really going to start to have some questions that might be considered or even remedied a little by when it goes into Cancer. That's way ahead. So Jupiter's our greater benefic, meaning it's physically the largest of the benefics out of Jupiter and Venus. And so it's very inclusive, it's very philosophical and generative, it's very elevating. It wants to do good things. Whatever we might sort of think about, you know, there can be a tendency to kind of beige out some of the good planets and the bad planets. We don't like to use those words. It's too polarizing. But essentially, the fundamentals of Jupiter is that it wants to bring blessings. It wants to help and assist. It wants to be abundant and elevating. Now, it can be inflating. It can be, you know, and it can be connected with inflation, as we know. It can also be about overgrowth and overindulgence and just a bit too much. But ultimately, it's you know, it's associated with wisdom, with the future and growing the future in hopefully good ways. It's faith, it's education or higher education. It's a lot of different things that we really want and desire in life. It's hope as well. And whatever we say about hope, it's actually quite an important thing for most of us to have a little bit of hope. So that's what Jupiter brings. It wants to stabilize, it wants to reform, and it loves the bigger picture. It doesn't like bitsy things. So it wants to have a cohesive vision. And so for a while, it's not particularly brilliantly, you know, well placed in Taurus, but it's perfectly happy there. It's just got a steadiness, and it can be a little overindulgent there because it's been, you know, having the finer things in life for a while now. And, you know, at the banquet in the garden, sitting there, eating all the good food, it's, you know, but it's also perhaps grown a few things like, you know, made things a little bit more expensive in regards to food and land and housing and these kind of real sort of hold in the hand material, you know, things that we rely on in life. So, you know, by the end of, it's in fact interesting that we are just on the verge of an eclipse where Jupiter is going to be featured in this eclipse. And if, you know, this is the last eclipse that, as we're recording, we're across the Taurus Scorpio axis, and Jupiter is kind of baked into that in a way that's going to be very interesting for the future and what Jupiter's up to. But Jupiter's currently retrograde in Taurus, and what is interesting is that this eclipse is at 5 degrees Taurus, which is the exact degree that Jupiter will be stationing to turn direct on the very last day of the year, Australian time, 31st of December. And that is a very sort of powerful degree simply because it's trying to show us a pattern here. It's trying to show us something symbolically. And that particular degree, as it starts to move forward, is that first decan of Taurus where there might be a fear around resources, and it's very much about trying to build something that is going to be of lasting value and maybe even see what we already have that we can build on and create something more abundant and helpful. It's also, as you know, the Sabian symbol connected to building a bridge, connecting, you know, maybe even incompatible or irreconcilable differences to try and negotiate that. So it will be interesting when Jupiter starts moving forward again, and it's going to therefore have its next project perhaps most significantly in April of 2024, and that's when it meets with Uranus. And you know, this is where we're going to have a conjunction, and those are fascinating because we've seen throughout history, and strongly recommend Richard Tarnas's book Cosmos and Psyche, which is a seminal, brilliant book about patterns in history as they correlate to patterns in astrology, with especially those outer planets. And you know, these meetings between Jupiter and Uranus have been very, very powerful. And they happen every sort of 14 years or so, but we can also see how there've been very significant periods of history where that's you know, created some incredible innovations and breakthroughs, but also it's associated with rebellion and all sorts of other kind of, you know, revolutionary impulse. So basically, you know, it's also so the exact date I will find for you. It's April 21st, where basically, you know, Jupiter conjuncts with Uranus, and that's quite seismic in a way, because, you know, here we've got this kind of great big bullock, you know, pulling the plow, as Jupiter pulling the plow through Taurus's fields, and then Uranus comes along and tries to sort of overturn the plow a bit, or maybe, you know, shakes it all up. And the bull doesn't like change. It wants to actually have a steady purpose. It's enjoying the work there. It's wanting to help out, but there's also perhaps potential breakthroughs and a sort of a liberation. However, we are in those sticky degrees of what I would, you know, a lot of astrologers say those late degrees of Taurus aren't particularly fun. It can be destabilizing. And it's the fixed star Algol is there, who is the head of the Medusa. And it's also where we derive the word alcohol from, and the idea of losing our head. So it's a very fiery, feisty, quite it's considered a malefic star, so there can be a lot sort of baked into that particular sort of meeting of Uranus and Jupiter that can be not only destabilizing but might not feel so great. It can be a bit sort of you know, we can end up feeling a bit battered around the head with that one. And it's right in those, you know, any late degree of any sign, those late degrees can be tricky. And as Jupiter moves through that, those seismic rumblings is sort of going to be happening in those fixed earth sign, in that fixed earth sign. And so a lot of our plans might be sort of upended, or, you know, we might not see things coming. And that's not to scare people. I think we can see things coming if we look at the sort of overarching pattern. There's been a bit of a resource squeeze for a long time, prices rising, you know, there's going to be a little bit of unrest. And, you know, I'm not going to go too much into that history of Uranus and Jupiter, because I'm sure you're doing that elsewhere, so that's fine. But I would be saying that, you know, this is quite a moment too, because the host of Taurus, Venus, will be in Aries. And so that's a very fiery placement for the host of Jupiter to be in, Jupiter and Uranus to be in while this is happening. And then I also noticed a bit of a malefic enclosure via sextile from Mars and Saturn as well, surrounding Jupiter and Uranus. So it's going to feel a bit scratchy, a bit pokey. And so we might actually find that after that, as you know, Jupiter's kind of in that late condition of being in, it's getting ready to go into Gemini, where it will be debilitated. And when it arrives in Gemini, it would have had that last degree kind of help from Venus, who will be in Taurus by that stage. And then she skips into Gemini to receive Jupiter there. And that occurs on May 26th. So basically, we've got a reception for Jupiter, which is kind of Venus trying to provide her balm, sort of midwifing Jupiter across that Taurus threshold into Gemini. And essentially, you know, Jupiter's going to be probably a little bit disoriented, a little bit worse for wear after that meeting. I mean, Jupiter also can help avert the worst of things as well. Jupiter provides that kind of preventative cushion for stuff as well, so that we might get, you know, somewhat of a kind of a buoyant alleviation at the same time as the challenges and everything. There could be a sense of something coming through that isn't entirely, you know, it's difficult doesn't mean entirely negative either. But once it arrives in Gemini, it immediately goes into a tight trine with Pluto in Aquarius. And that to me feels like, okay, we've arrived in the mid-20s. This is a real change of epoch. And Jupiter in Gemini is very much wanting to help Pluto with whatever agenda Pluto has. And Jupiter in Gemini isn't going to be the most discerning, because Gemini is it's about information, it's curious, it's sharing, it's not greedy with ideas, or it's very open and minded and objective, and but it's high speed, and it's just like, oh, here's an idea, and here's an idea, and here's an idea. And it's not necessarily about sifting out which idea might be better when, you know, it doesn't judge and it doesn't critique. And so Jupiter, in trying to get some sort of overarching vision, is not really going to be best equipped to do that when it's in Gemini, where all it will be probably doing for a while is just growing a proliferation of ideas and expanding upon that. It's going to be like a mycelial network just sprouting up everywhere. Lots of not only ideas, but probably innovations and tech innovations. And there's just going to be a lot going on everywhere, everything, everywhere, all at once. And we won't necessarily be able to slow it down, because the host Mercury is just going to be, it's a chameleon. It's always moving and always changing. On average, every few weeks, it'll change signs. So whatever Mercury is doing, Jupiter's going to have to look to that. And yeah, so we're going to be entering a very busy, high speed, like the speed of light it's going to feel like, because whatever Pluto is doing, you know, and Pluto does have dark agendas as well as bringing wealth and transformation and death and rebirth. It can, you know, I think Austin Coppock describes it as the site of our horror, our collective kind of imaginative. So it's horror. So there's a lot of kind of represents our fears as well, not in the way that Saturn does, in a sort of collective, you know, it's our monsters that we imagine. And so already we've got the spectre of AI as one of the monsters that, you know, collectively we've imagined, but it's also, you know, becoming much more of a sort of a reality to how we're going to manage that. And so, yeah, this tight trine between Jupiter and Pluto, Jupiter's just going to arrive there and be so enthusiastic about all of the ideas and go, yeah, sure, why not? Let's do that. Let's go ahead and let's see what happens. And it's going to be like he's not going to be having the banquet of, you know, lovely feasting in Taurus anymore. He's going to be just on caffeine. It's just going to be, you know, this big gaseous planet just drinking the caffeine all day long and just not really being able to be super, super kind of choosy about what he's going to grow. Just wondering what your take on that is.
Yes, I'm just like, yes. I mean, yeah, it's just going to be like he's on drugs constantly. Like the nervous system needs to be tended to with Jupiter and Gemini. But I love some of the, you know, some of the words that you've used, you know, that buoyant alleviation as, you know, Venus ushers Jupiter in, because, you know, Jupiter comes in on the 26th, and yeah, there's Venus at 2 degrees Gemini, there's the Sun at 5 degrees Gemini, and not long after that Mercury moves into Gemini. So all of a sudden Mercury's back at home, you know. So with Jupiter, and like Antoinette said, and that's something of course that I've got written down too, is that we must then look to Mercury at all times. And Mercury is fast, he's a trickster, he's doing all of his retrogrades pretty much in fire signs next year. Well, I mean, I'm not talking into 2025, but two of them after Jupiter moves into Gemini are in fire signs. You know, one of them, I've got the date here on the 4th of December. Oh, hello, Jupiter retrograde, exactly opposite Mercury retrograde. What the fuck? Like, seriously, how is this okay? Like, I'm just like, holy heck. So I love that, and I love all the words that, you know, and this is why I love Antoinette and bring her on, because she is a bloody, I don't even know, you do literature and you're an amazing wordsmith, and I love all of that about you. But because I have Mercury in Gemini, so Gemini rules my 9th, but I'm a Placidus girl, so Mercury is in my 8th, and Mercury is definitely in my 8th, but Gemini rules my 9th, and so just words to me, oh my god, they so excite me. So I love listening to Antoinette's words. So I've written down all of those cool words that, you know, with Jupiter trine Pluto, I have to just quote you now forever: everything, everywhere, all at once, because it is going to be like that. I mean, because these are the two great guns of the, you know, we're talking about Zeus and Hades. Are you for real? Like, and we're lucky that it's in flow, but just because it's a trine, again, it's overdoing. It's going to overdo things. So I even wrote here, what came down for me was like, yes, big money, but maybe some big bad business decisions. Like, who are we going to see fall in that time? And again, because like what you said with Pluto, there are a lot of businesses or corporations or politics or whatever that is with the dark agendas. So Jupiter in there, like there's going to be some really shit decisions being made, some really bad miscommunications. And again, with all the AI and what we're seeing isn't really real and all the things, like it is a big transit in a big time. And being being exiled and in his detriment, again, before he gets into, we've got to wait all the way to 2025 before he's really happy in Cancer. So there's, again, like you said, when you mentioned that, like he's okay in Taurus, like he's good in Taurus, like again, but then he moves straight from Taurus after the hit with Uranus and the hit with Algol. Then he moves into Gemini, where he's just going to be pepped up on caffeine for a year. And then he finally moves into Cancer, where he can just relax. It's just like, whoa, yeah. It's a time. So yeah, loving everything you're sharing. It's just amazing.
Well, one thing I forgot to mention is that just as he's exiting Taurus, there would have been the Cazimi with Taurus, within the Taurus with the sun, obviously. And so being burned up at the heart of the sun as well, it's that moment near Algol still as well, where before he gets to Gemini, is by the time he makes into Gemini, I think I'm emphasizing that mainly because the decisions that Jupiter makes are going to be a little bit, more off potentially, because it won't be in great shape when he arrives there. He's going to be sort of because he's died at the heart of the sun. He's reborn. Yeah. And there's going to be, and also in those early degrees of Gemini, Jupiter's actually pretty well placed. Weirdly, like even though it's in its exile, it's very clever. It's very adept and quick at taking on new technologies. But of course, with Pluto over there in Aquarius, we're looking at sort of the rise of the technocrats in a lot of ways. We sort of have this deep, dark power of the technocrats driving humanity in a lot of ways, and in terms of Jupiter really playing into that and going, yeah, okay, let's grow all of these technologies and all of these capacities, and let's do something really interesting. Let's just go for it. And it's going to be all engines steaming ahead. It's just going to be completely, we're actually going to have to try and potentially find ways, and I think that we've done that really well this year, with the challenges of the eclipses, but also Venus through Leo. It's really helped us work out what we value, what we want, what we desire, what's really good for us. And those fixed signs are really good at getting clear about, no, this is the way I'm going. And maybe, okay, we're going to get shaken up, or maybe even, sure, you can pivot and change your mind, but it's much more about finding a kind of steady thread through everything when there's going to be the temptation or the excitement at all of this new stuff that seems really cool. Do we need another app? Do we need to sign up to this other thing? Do we need to actually take on more and more and more information when perhaps we're already overloaded? If anything, where Jupiter and Gemini is going to show us that we're spoiled for choice, that we might be just taking on way too much, and that at some point we're going to perhaps have a little bit of a correction. And I see that first correction as being the square, the first, what we call sort of Jupiter's first quarter phase square with Saturn, because we had that big conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter in Aquarius back in 2020. And so we're going to be moving into the first quarter sort of phase of that cycle. And, that's going to be, let me see, I've got the date and I just have to go through to my notes and find that.
I've got it here, the 17th of August.
17th of August. Yeah. Okay.
And I just wanted to just touch on that before you go on, because I think that this is a prevalent point. Something that I talk about with Jupiter transits a lot, especially in Gemini, is the art of restraint. I think it's not an art that many people can master. But the art of restraint is actually going to help us and not hinder us moving through Jupiter in Gemini. Now, one other little thing I want to share is that our Gemini house has really been worked. We had the North Node in Gemini. We had Mars retrograde in Gemini. Jupiter moves into Gemini. Also, something to note, the Venus superior conjunction in the underworld also happens at 14 degrees of Gemini on the 5th of June. So that is also happening. That is her like full moon part of her cycle, right? Is this superior conjunction, the true underworld. I know that the inferior retrograde conjunction is often spoke of as the underworld, but she's in the heart of the sun. She's not in the underworld. With the superior direct conjunction, she is in the underworld. So we're having that as well. And then just to throw light on all of this, Uranus will then move into that Gemini house when Uranus moves into Gemini. So that Gemini house, you have been getting clues, nudges, journeys. Like there has been so much there. So this is around what have you restrained there? What have you learned there? What are you growing there? What's going on? Because Jupiter is going to fucking expand the shit out of that. We're going to have the Venus Cazimi, which is quite special. You know, I really am excited about this superior conjunction. And then we're going to have Uranus come in as well. So I just wanted to just touch on those things too, because the art of restraint and really plugging into that Gemini house, it's going to be really important for us to really understand that house in your chart that is ruled by Gemini because of the node and Mars and Jupiter and Venus. And, you know, obviously Venus moves through there every year. I'm not saying that, but to have her Cazimi now in there, it's just like, okay, like what are we really, you know, what is it that we are really needing to learn? Because we are moving and slipstreaming into a new consciousness, and it's fast. It is fast. And if you go with it, I mean, the mental overload, the mental issues, the anxiety, all of these things will take you before you even know it's got you. It's already happening. It's already happening. People that aren't aware, people that don't know how to harness emotional intelligence, look at all the emotional reactivity. And I'm not speaking into trauma or tragedy that's happening. I'm speaking into just everyone emotionally reacting to fucking everything, giving opinions on things they know nothing about, spreading misinformation, right wing, left wing. It's really bad. And the fact that it's infiltrated into Australia is really disgusting. But anyway, it's happening. So the thing is, and I've also heard Donald Trump might get reelected, and he's a fucking Gemini. And I'm just like, is this going to happen? Like, it's wild stuff. So I want to hear about this first square from Jupiter to Saturn, but I just wanted to really sort of, you know, paint that bit of a picture too of how important this Gemini house is. Yeah.
It's hugely important. And especially, you know, once Uranus does join, you know, I mean, we've got air, like this is revolutionary. And, you know, it's a little bit different, say, to the storming of the Bastille or something where that was, you know, I think Pluto was in Aquarius, yes. And then we had Uranus conjoining Jupiter in Leo opposite. And Leo, of course, about sovereignty and kingship and leadership and authority and, you know, all of those sorts of things that were overthrown. But here we've, you know, when we get Uranus into Gemini, that's making, you know, this is going to be, I mean, there's a bit of shifting back, isn't there, with Pluto into Capricorn, but ultimately we've got the signature of Pluto is moving into Aquarius. This is a new era, and we're going to arrive there, and that's just going to be so fast. And it's also, you know, it sort of makes me think that part of this image of Jupiter in Gemini is this kind of beehive. It's like a hive of bees, and I think I mentioned that to you. I'm sure that there might be other astrologers who thought of it. I've looked for that, but I haven't found anyone talking about it. I'm sure that other people have considered this, but to me, it's just perfect for this imagery of the hive of bees, because we've got lots of different activity. It's like all the bees, all the ideas, they're out in the daylight, out in the sun. It's a very diurnal kind of energy and sign, very yang, very active. And they're going off and they're collecting all of the pollen to bring back to the hive, because Jupiter really wants to actually bring it all together and have, you know, this common cause or idea, the unifying principle, which would be the queen bee. But the thing is that, you know, the bees get easily distracted and go, oh, but I like that flower, bring that pollen back and that and that and that. And it won't even potentially notice if something's poisoned or if something is, you know, not necessarily going to be helpful, or they might get stuck out too long outside. I mean, that's a silly analogy, but, you know, there's this kind of this
I like that analogy.
Sense of kind of going everywhere and then having to come back to the hive and then going, oh, right, okay, this is what we're trying to do. But every day we go out and we get more and more and more, and then we bring it back. And it's this constant attempt, I think, of Jupiter to try and stabilize and bring into this wholeness all of these different ideas that might be very not necessarily easily reconciled and not necessarily ethical, not necessarily wise, because that is, you know, the planet of wisdom. And so we've also got the shadow side of that, which is the hive mind, which we're already getting And if we think about Pluto in Aquarius, I think that plays beautifully into that agenda that Pluto in Aquarius may have, which is that it wants a kind of hive mind, that it wants, you know, and through having a hive mind, it can control through censorship and fear. And, you know, people aren't necessarily saying dangerous things anymore because they're afraid of being cancelled, or they're afraid of, you know, repercussions. And, you know, that's understandable, but have we lost sort of our courage to really be standing up and having an unpopular opinion, or having an idea that might just be different to someone else's, without prefacing it with this huge kind of oh, but it's okay if you like that. If I don't, I just don't like it, it doesn't mean that you don't, you know, there's a problem with you liking something. You know, there's a
Such
lot.
a good point. Such a good point. So much of that. Yeah.
So we might actually find that there's a kind of a freedom and a liberation of ideas, and that there's just so much going on that people don't have the energy to fall into those kind of you know, angry little diatribe. I mean, there's going to be still divisions and things like you were saying, but I'm sort of wondering if it's going to be going at such high speed, and Gemini is so curious and detached that maybe there just sort of be a lot more opening up of possibilities and ideas as well, a lot more sharing of ideas, maybe even mini marketplaces opening, because it's you know, and different currencies cropping up, and because Mercury rules marketplaces and currencies as well, and we might even have some more techno kind of currencies. And I'm not familiar with the world of crypto. I'm not kind of across all of that, so I'm not even going to speak to that. But, you know, there's just so many potential possibilities that, you know, it's sort of a revolutionary take on how we decentralize marketplaces, and currencies might even crop up down the track with this Gemini sort of activity, because it might be a way of sort of people wanting to take back some kind of autonomy or freedom or possibility with what goes on there, because this, yeah, especially with Uranus in the mix, sort of providing a bit of liberating, revolutionary sort of zeal with everything. So but this first quarter square with Saturn, that's when, you know, it's like you were saying, things can kind of really get a bit out of hand. And so this could be one of the checks and balances that Jupiter is going to be facing when it squares with Saturn. So that's yeah, we said the 20th of August, didn't we?
Yeah, I said the 17th, but yeah, 17th. It's around that time. Yeah, 17th.
Oh, I've said yeah,
for a few days. Hey.
Yeah, I said a few days before, around the 15th, 17th. So yeah, depends what your orb is too, I guess. So, but definitely around that time. And so, and it'll also be joined by Mars. Jupiter will be with Mars.
I know.
So wow.
I know. Mars is back in bloody Jupiter again.
Yeah.
I mean, back in Gemini again.
Which is, you know, I have nothing against Mars and Gemini people. I was just like, Gemini's a bit of a tricky house for me. So I sort of find that like Mars and Gemini for that long there was the last, you know, the last time was, yeah. But anyway, this is not a retrograde, but
yeah, it's not.
So, but the thing is that, so both malefics will be squaring one another. Yep. So, you know, that's part of that Jupiter experience. And I think there's even a bit of a T-square with Venus, isn't there? Because sorry, went blank. Saturn will be opposite Venus and Venus and Virgo, and so there's kind of, you know, a bit of a tension. So Jupiter will be squaring Venus, and that's not a bad thing either. But we might actually start to find like, well, what is it that we're actually doing here? How Saturn might be going, you know, come on, you know, get real. You need to grow up a bit with mature some of this wisdom. You know, what are you going to do with all that information? How are you using that? You know, and what are the ethics? What are the limits of perhaps empathy, or limits of compassion, or limits of the visionary kind of aspect? That, because, you know, Pisces is traditionally ruled by Jupiter, and Saturn in Pisces is going to be feeling a little bit rocked and rolled on the waves there, because you know, with Jupiter being tugged along by the forelock by Mercury all the time, it's not going to have that sort of steadiness that Jupiter and Taurus had. So, you know, we're going to feel a lot more from Saturn as well. through this period. Not that I'm talking about Saturn, but you know, this square, that's when you start to feel like compromise is required. That's when, you know, when that square happens, some compromise is being demanded or being, you know, tested and pushed for. And it is an overcoming square from Saturn. And so, you know, I think that Jupiter will be trying to find a sort of a check. And even though it will be on sort of steroids with Mars there,
I know.
you know, very wordy, very swordy wordy, very spiky,
swordy, very spiky.
Getting lippy.
Very much so. Yeah.
You know, that's there's going to be a lot of sort of action, but you know, this, and also I'm just sort of thinking with Jupiter and Gemini, there could also be a bit of deception, a bit of trickery, because you know, Mercury is the trickster. He's wanting to kind of get away with sort of things because he's not really attached to the morality. You know, this is one of the strengths of Gemini, of course, is it wants to actually kind of explore all of the ideas and change according to what it's interested in and what it wants to do next. And so, you know, we've got that sort of chameleon trickster energy, and with those mutable signs in the, you know, these mutable signs, there is a bit of duplicity. There's also that kind of multiple view, and there's the multiverse that's kind of rising. So it's really going to be those sort of checks and balances coming in with that Saturn and Pisces. And, you know, what are we trying to protect? What are we trying to limit or draw boundaries around? Are we even doing that effectively at all? I would be saying probably not by that stage. It's you know, it's something that we might need to be sort of thinking about the consequences of this sort of unchecked growth, this constant sort of push towards infinity, which is Jupiter's impulse. Yep. So you know, there's going to be that kind of unimpeded growth, and as particularly in those later degrees of Gemini, that's where we might be sort of checking the hubris a bit as well. Because, I mean, if you think about ideas, there's been a lot of, I've sort of been, you know, you know, I've been a student of history, and I love seeing these kind of patterns, is that we're now at a period of time where if someone just gets up and says it on the internet, they think they've invented it. And actually, maybe if it's just because it's not on the internet, or it's not in a reel, or it's not, you know, on a video, it doesn't mean that it doesn't come from somewhere, that someone has, you know, there's, what are we doing around intellectual property? Or I mean, that feels like such an old, clunky idea now, because everything has just gone wild with, it's the Wild West in terms of any sort of ideas. And then, you know, there's this notion of gatekeeping, which is different to being able to understand, say, Jupiter's wisdom, and perhaps why it's so empowered in Cancer. One of the reasons is that it draws on it stands on the shoulders of giants. It understands the wisdom of history and memory, and that we're drawing upon a story. It's got a narrative thread that draws across generations, that draws across periods of time, not in the way that Saturn does. It's slightly different, but it's drawing on ancestral wisdom and memory. And it's like understanding, you know, it's kind of got that breadth of vision that incorporates a sort of it's a greater sort of scope than perhaps, you know, we've kind of got to this purely intellectual sort of phase of existence whereby everyone's wanting to niche. And so sometimes there's also theft, and not even realizing that that's what's going on, because it's just out there and everything's moving so fast, people don't have time. And we all slip up with things sometimes too, because you can get really like, oh, did I say that, or did they say that? There's a lot of confusion about, you know, and that's the hive mind too, is it suddenly starts to feel like it's all being generated from this kind of pulsing brain.
Wow, yeah, that's some great analogies there. So that's literally food for thought right there, isn't it? Like, it's just, yes.
So, so I think that we will be getting some checks later on in when Jupiter is in Gemini before we move into that Cancer period, where we might sort of see the value of that wisdom, that we can't just sort of let things grow out of control to the point where we think we're reinventing the wheel. And, does it need to be reinvented? And who might have a wiser view of that, or a deeper view of that, and what's useful and what's not? Because Gemini isn't quite like that, like Virgo in the other Mercury ruled sign that wants to sift and edit and take time, sorting what's
trust me, I've got Mercury in Gemini. We can't be bothered doing that shit. Yeah, no,
I totally
and I've got Neptune in my 3rd house, so I'm just like, details, schmeetails. I do not care about the details.
Well, there's the wisdom in just being able to get it done too, and get it out there, and being sharing ideas. So it's just like, it's trying to balance things, and that's what I think we're going to have trouble with this Jupiter thing. But it's going to be very exciting. It's going, and those having a Jupiter return, that's going to be quite thrilling for the amount of prolific. Just, I think we're in very exciting times, and certainly interesting times. Yeah, there's going to be these challenges, but so anyway, there's that square where we're going to be tested to perhaps sort out what is important, and maybe set some limits. We won't necessarily heed that, but we're going to get another chance at that, because Jupiter's going to station to go retrograde on October 9th of 2024. And so that will be at 21 degrees Gemini. And so it's at that point already reaching that 3rd decan of Gemini, which is that sense that maybe we've overexpanded, maybe we've gone just way too far here.
Definitely, because we're already into that 3rd decan. It's just like, wow, we're Jupiter retrograded this year in Taurus in the 2nd decan, so he gets a Gemini. It just shows you that speed, like all of a sudden he's in the 3rd decan, and it's like exactly what you said. Hey, we've gone too far. We need to stop and go all the way back to that 2nd decan.
Exactly. So it's going to make it's going to head back towards a 2nd square with Saturn, almost as though, well, hang on a minute, if you didn't get it right this time, I'm going to make Saturn's going to say, hey, you remember me? I'm going to make you think about things a bit more, because I'm exhausted over here with all your moving around and taking on more, and so so it's going to go. And in fact, that square happens on December 25th, 2024. At 14 degrees. They'll both be at sort of 14 degrees there, Pisces and Gemini, Saturn in Pisces and Jupiter in Gemini. So, and then we'll get the stationing direct of Jupiter in 2025. That's a whole other story, obviously, because I'm not doing that. But, I'm sort of thinking, what are we going to be needing through this period to try and stabilize? I mean, I was sort of joking with a friend the other night that, maybe we'll just have the rise and rise and rise of ASMR videos, because everyone's going to want to have soothing sounds and, just completely try and chill out the nervous system. There are things that we might even want to start thinking about, because instead of we're going to feel like we're on a roller coaster, probably, because life is a bit of a roller coaster. You can't control everything. But in terms of how we might respond to that, it's probably taking a little bit more responsibility for our kind of somatic embodied existence, because that's what we've been learning this year as well, that embodied reality of really trying to get down to the basics. We know what we can do. We can, it's almost become a cliche, the self-care and what, meditating and looking after your nervous system. I could just parrot all of that stuff when we know about it. Do we do it because we get hooked in to, it's such a temptation to have this constant overstimulus and this input. It's always input, that's going to expand and increase next year.
And it is the overstimulation, and it's exactly that. Like, yes, you should do something, but I always tell people too, is like, if meditating every day is something that you're just ticking off a list, what's the point? You know, like, again, I think that what can really help navigate this time too is stripping back to simplicity, which, you know, I've been speaking about for so long. Hello, stellium and Taurus. But the thing is that really getting our perspectives right, because, you know, when Mars did his retrograde in Gemini, I did a masterclass called Overstimulated and Undernourished. And I think that we're going to get a real dose of that again when Mars enters Gemini on the 21st of July and then hits Jupiter. And it's just like reactivating all of that overstimulation and undernourishment. Again, the desire to need more and want more and constantly trying to fill the void. And sometimes sitting down for an hour meditating is filling a void because it doesn't change anything for you. It's just, oh, I ticked that. I did the yoga. I did the this. I did the this. I had my green juice. I had my green. And I mean, you're the angriest person on the fucking planet, right? Like, it just doesn't matter. Like, and it's about, again, you know, slowing down. I think that is going to be, if Jupiter in Taurus hasn't helped you to slow down, well, you know, far out. I don't know what you're going to do, because Jupiter and Taurus, you know, Gemini learns from Taurus just like Taurus learns from Gemini, right? Like, we want those semi-sextiles, our neighbors per se, you know, Aries from Taurus and Gemini. Like, what are you learning and putting into place? So Jupiter and Taurus is giving that slow plow. It's like, this is the fertility. This is the everything you said in the Jupiter and Taurus, which I highly still recommend. Go and watch the Jupiter and Taurus as well after you've watched this one, because remember, we've got 6 months of, you know, 5 months of Jupiter and Taurus still. And to feel Antoinette's words, you'll get what I say. It's like silk, and it was about the, you know, the embodiment and all these, and just, you said digesting life. And, you know, for me, I personally, I've really, like, 2023 has been really quite rich for me personally, and deep and delicious. But, you know, now we're going to move into this Gemini stuff. And again, like, if you haven't even been tending to your nervous system, I mean, it's the frazzle, the if you're not knowing how to defrag, and it can be something simple. It can be, you know, taking things off your phone, more apps off your phone, not getting more apps, doing those things. I do want to speak into one thing before we tie up, though, is a signature that I looked at with Jupiter in the retrograde that is actually going to be sextile Chiron, and they stay together. And so I just sort of thought, what are your thoughts on that? I thought that was actually quite nice, especially because, as you said, Jupiter's got to that third decan, and it's like, stop, like, come back, like, let's go over what we've just, you know, all the ideas or all the things that we've done. But Chiron's in that supportive sextile, offering some sort of wisdom and healing, hopefully, right?
Yeah, it's kind of a bit of a midwife role almost, you know. I mean, it's, I think that is potentially very helpful, because we can always dip into that. That feels like a choice, doesn't it? It feels like this is something that is very much available to us. It's also interesting, I thought that, and I didn't mention it, but, you know, because there's just so much detail, but I still feel like it kind of speaks to that, is that when Jupiter went into, sorry, it hasn't done that yet. When it goes into Gemini, see, I'm getting ahead of myself. It feels very Gemini at the moment, because I'm, you know, I'm kind of high speed. That when, you know, it passes by Algol in Taurus and into Gemini, we've got the Pleiades, the seven sisters, fixed stars, and there's also a healing association with them. So it's like Venus and the Pleiades are kind of applying a bit of a balm to Jupiter. And then, of course, we've got Chiron there. So it's like this healing source is always available. And it feels like very vulnerable, that Chiron healing can feel very, it strikes at the core of something when you tune into it, that can sometimes feel uncomfortable, but can be very, very profoundly healing. It takes you through such a, you know, I mean, okay, Pluto does the underworld journey, but this is, you know, Chiron has that extreme power as well. But I do feel that, you know, and I also, you know, just looking at people's charts can, in terms of helping people manage that sort of nervous system stuff. I don't know what you do, but it can be helpful to look at the third house for you. You know, some people aren't good for meditating on a daily basis, you know, like looking at that third house and how we kind of do our little rituals and everything that can ground us or make us feel really sort of calmer or more in tune with ourselves. That can be a powerful way to do that. And tuning into where Chiron is as well, and sort of seeing, especially when it makes that signature sextile that you're talking about with Jupiter, that starts to feel like okay, that's available to us, and it's going to be something that we maybe could dip into and use as a good resource. So especially with that square to Saturn, which is also going to probably feel a little bit dampening at times, but I think it's going to be a healthy check. I mean, I'm very Saturn, so I'm on board with Saturn. Thank you.
I love Saturn. Yeah. I have Jupiter and Saturn conjunct in my chart. So yeah.
Well, then I've got them exactly opposite. So
look at that. I love that.
So yeah, but it's there's
the
going
Chiron be... because Jupiter will actually sextile Chiron from the 28th of September through till the 9th of the 10th, where he stations retrograde at 21, and Chiron's also at 21 there, and then they move to 20, and so there's actually just this time, like, you know, where there is this support, and like you said, the it's a healing source, it's a balm, and I really love that. And there's so like, again, like you said, you know, we could talk for 6 hours about this. There's so much, because in typical Gemini Jupiter form, we are like, let's do another one like midway through, because it's just like there's so much to share with what Jupiter is doing in Gemini. Like there's a lot, you know, it's a very amplified transit, and definitely a signature transit that takes us into that 2025. Like,
and you know, that Jupiter is a storyteller. Jupiter wants the story. And it wants the narrative thread. It wants to see an arc. And so, in Gemini, we'll be challenged to do that when we've got all the pieces of the story. But how they will come together, or how we'll try and sort of, you know, how that will come to fruition, and what will be sort of there at the end, is very much to be seen. And that's I guess the course correct with Cancer, is it's very much about the overarching story. But we will be challenged, but I think that it's going to be pretty exciting at first, and that it's going to be quite an expansive. But again, remembering that it's in its exile, so Jupiter is in its exile in Gemini, and just to, you know, kind of say that that's not a bad, doesn't mean that if you've got Jupiter and Gemini, I feel like I have to say that, because I think people can feel quite bad if they go, oh, a debilitated planet, what does that mean? Does that mean I've got, you know, something bad going? No, it just means that it's doing something very different to what it's used to. It's differently equipped and differently resourced, and that makes it really fascinating too, and really, you know, it's got different gifts. So you know, it has to try harder, but sometimes that can be even more interesting. So
I often say that too, with that caveat, like, to really understand astrology and archetypes, you can't take things personally. Like, as soon as you start taking things personally, you've missed the point of astrology. I mean, I think I've been banging on about that for like 10 years. I'm like, there's no point in having a reading or listening to stuff if you're going to go, oh, but I've got my moon in Scorpio and it's amazing. Well, good on you for saying it's amazing. You actually need to be honest with yourself and understand the depth of the archetype, why it's debilitated, why it's in exile. We're not saying it's good or bad, but the thing is that something that Kelly Surtees said is, she's like, debilitated or exiled planets are like they're hungover. Like, it's like we go to work. So Jupiter's in Cancer, goes to work and friggin' fires, like Jupiter in Cancer. But Jupiter in Gemini is like, I'm hungover. I've got a million things going on. Like, give me more coffee. Like, they're just a hungover planet. And that's not bad. We still get shit done. We still learn things. God, I've got Mars in Taurus. And I love it, but it's a pain in my ass because it's my outer sect malefic as well. So, you know, my outer sect malefic is in Taurus, debilitated. Like, but the thing is that I don't take it personally. And I think that's a really good tip, is to, you know, you're missing astrology if you're putting, you know, placements or signs on people and you're explaining something through a person, because that's not what astrology is. And if you take something personally, you need to go, why am I taking that? What don't I like about myself? Because, you know, just because you've got a placement that's there, it's not an attack. And I think, I'm very similar to doing, sort of caveating that, you know.
We can't conflate the placements with ourselves and who we are. That's at worst it's narcissistic astrology, at best it's missing the point. And
just a last thing too, I just love, you know, that you want to look for your Gemini house, but I love that you brought in the third, and I'll say to bring in the sixth as well. I think that to remedy, like you said, is to look at what will work for you, maybe as a somatic tool or a ritual or a routine or a health habit or you know, a mental defrag to look at the 3rd and the 6th, because they're both ruled by Mercury, where Jupiter's going to be moving through Mercury's sign. And so depending on what planets you've got there, it will sort of edge towards what could remediate, you know, when everything is too much. It's like, hey, oh, remember you've got, you know, your moon in the 3rd house, you know, this is her house of joy. So actually for you, it is important to have a ritual and have some sort of, you know, routine. You know, for some people, routine is really anchoring them and grounding for them. But if you just get straight up and have coffee, well, yeah, you might be fucked for the rest of the day. Like, so don't do it, you know. And I know that sounds simple, but we really need to simplify and stop doing shit that, you know, isn't nourishing us. And if we can start soon, you know, we can really then build a solid energetic framework and template to be able to move through this acceleration of information and the busyness and the too much. But if we're getting caught up and sort of taken away with it, and our body's not ready, we're going to be sick or have anxiety or worry or have problems with our nervous system and relationships. All the things will go under because you haven't tended to the framework, not just physically, but energetically and somatically, to be able to abstain and you know, actually be able to get through something like this. Like this is interesting because Uranus will move into Gemini, and he comes in and he goes out a little bit, so 2025, 2026, stuff like that. But the thing is that by the time Jupiter comes all the way back around to Gemini, Uranus will be out of Gemini. So we're actually not going to have them both in the same, which I think is positive. But then we get that next Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in Cancer, which to me is just like sublime. So the thing is that, you know, there's a reason for that, you know, like in that interim, because Jupiter will not be in Gemini for 12 more years. So in that interim, Uranus has done all of Gemini, right? Like Uranus has done his 7 years, right? Wham, bam, thank you, man. Let's do this. It's going to be a very different world. Let me give you the hot tip there. And then before they both come together in Cancer. So it's like that Jupiter in Gemini before the next conjunction in Cancer will be very interesting, because it's going to be like Jupiter really cleaning up a lot of that Gemini stuff too. It's going to, I just find that, again, we're going like 8 years. I'm talking like 12.
Yeah, it's fascinating though, isn't it?
A long time away, but yeah. It's the time travel of astrology, right?
Yeah. No, I think it's fascinating. And I think if people, there's just so much if people can think about those somatic remedies as well and really get back to, because we have practiced that, and maybe even look at the elements that are sort of slightly missing, like more earth, more water. When it really kicks into air, we might just need to be sort of grounding things a bit more. And I mean, not white knuckling it through, doing the shoulds, and I should meditate and I should do this. I've got a friend, for instance, and the 6th house is really a great way of looking at you know, health and supporting the health as well. But her 3rd house, which is, you know, just your kind of your rituals in your mind and everything, amongst other things, but she's got it in Aries, and she's tried for years to meditate and sit down and do it, but she said, I just like to get up and go for a big bike ride on you know, on a whim, spontaneously, first thing in the morning, or a run or something, but I should really meditate, and I've got my altar ready and I've got my room ready for meditation. I go, honey, just go and you run in the forest like you love doing. That's your kind of meditation. And it's sometimes we need, almost like we're asking for permission, because we're told, oh, we should meditate to be sort of, you know, spiritually kind of in tune or relaxed or whatever. And it doesn't necessarily, you know, find what is good for you. And we've learned hopefully a bit of that this year, and just really ground in and be who you are amidst this flurry of constant input, is just to remember who we are and what's good for us. So it's a way of grounding perhaps, and centering back into it.
Absolutely. Well, Antoinette, I know that we could talk for another 8 hours, and this has just been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for incredible information and downloads around this Jupiter finishing up in Taurus, and also Jupiter moving into Gemini. I'm excited, and you know, it's exhilarating, and it's just been an absolute pleasure listening and learning off you. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It's just been lovely. I love chatting with you, and it's really, I love talking astrology with you. So it's great. It's great fun. Yeah.
Thank you everyone so much for watching. Check out all of Antoinette's work, and we will see you again really soon. Thank you for joining today.
Thanks. Bye.